Welcome to the Veil of Truth, your gateway to uncovering hidden insights and illuminating mysteries. I'm thrilled you've joined our global community. Whether you're watching from a bustling city skyline or a quiet countryside, we're glad you're here. Globe showing Europe, Africa, so tell me, where are you tuning in from today? Chapter 1, A Curious Invitation. The late afternoon sun lay low in the London sky, brushing the rooftops with a thin wash of gold. Inside his impeccably arranged Whitehall flat, Hercule Poirot sat at a small but perfectly polished table, enjoying a cup of thick, velvety hot chocolate. He had just concluded an agreeable morning spent rearranging a drawer of neckties, each one color-coordinated, pressed, and carefully folded according to his own exacting standards, when his orderly routine was interrupted by a soft knock on the door. George, his loyal valet, entered with a silver tray balanced effortlessly in his hands. "A new batch of correspondence for you, sir." Poirot nodded, setting aside his cup. He reached for the letters with elegant precision, his fingertips barely grazing their edges. He disliked smudges on envelopes. One did not know when such a detail might become important. Most of the letters were trivial matters: an invitation to lecture at a gentleman's club, a request for an endorsement, advertisements, and 2 notes from theatre productions asking for his attendance. Poirot set these aside in neat piles. Then, at last, his eyes settled on something interesting. A thick ivory envelope sealed with a gold crest, an ornate W entwined with curling vines. Poirot held it up, turning it slightly so the afternoon light caught the shine. "Ah," he murmured, "this is something different." He opened it with delicate precision, sliding out a single sheet of heavy parchment. The handwriting was elegant but rushed. The ink slightly smudged, as though written with trembling hands. "Monsieur Poirot, I beg of you, come to Winterset Hall at once. There is a matter that threatens not only my family's reputation but my very life. Eleanor Whitcomb." Poirot read it twice, his eyebrows arching with the faintest hint of intrigue. Eleanor Whitcomb, heiress to one of Kent's most venerable estates, descendant of magistrates, politicians, and scholars. A woman rarely associated with melodrama or panic. It was not in the nature of such a disciplined, discreet lady to write a plea so urgent unless she was truly afraid. Poirot sat back in his chair, fingertips pressed together. "George," he said softly, "prepare my travelling bag. We go to Kent." The journey to Winterset Hall carried Poirot through rolling countryside, fields that shimmered in the early evening light, and clusters of ancient woodland. As the train slowed near Whitcomb Station, Poirot noticed the peculiar stillness of the landscape: no birdsong, no distant laughter, nothing but the low whistle of the wind. A countryside wrapped in silence. A chauffeur awaited him, a somber man with grey hair and a stiff posture, who introduced himself as Mr. Blythe. "Miss Whitcomb instructed me to collect you directly, sir. She's been rather anxious for your arrival." Poirot gave a courteous nod. "Then we shall not keep the lady waiting." The car sped down a long, winding road bordered by tall hedges that seemed to lean inward like watchful guardians. Twilight deepened with every passing minute, veiling the world in a haze of soft indigo. Just when Poirot began to wonder how isolated this estate truly was, Winterset Hall emerged from behind a stand of oak trees. The great manor stood proud and silent, its stone facade washed in the fading lavender of dusk. Tall windows glimmered faintly, and ivy clung to its walls as though trying to swallow it whole. A lake stretched beside it, dark, perfectly still, reflecting the manor's looming shape like black glass. Poirot stepped out of the car and inhaled the cool air. "Très atmospheric," he murmured. Inside, the hall was dimly lit, the warm glow of wall lamps battling the fast-approaching night. Eleanor Whitcomb descended the staircase almost at once, a tremor visible even in her graceful movements. "Monsieur Poirot," she said breathlessly, "thank you for coming so quickly." Poirot bowed his head slightly. "Mademoiselle, your letter suggested a matter of urgency." "It is," she whispered. More than you can imagine. He noticed several things immediately: her pale complexion, her restless eyes, the stiffness in her shoulders as if bracing herself for bad news. Fear, genuine fear, haunted her expression. She guided him into a drawing room where a fire burned low, its weak flames casting long, wavering shadows onto the carpet. Though the room was furnished with elegance, a tension hung in the air like an invisible fog. "I must apologize," Eleanor began, twisting a handkerchief between her fingers. "You have arrived in the midst of a very unsettling situation." Poirot gestured gently for her to continue. "For several weeks now, strange things have been happening at Winterset Hall. Letters have arrived, threats, unsigned. Objects have been moved or broken. And recently," she paused, swallowing hard. "Recently, I have felt as though someone here wishes to harm me." Poirot regarded her with calm sympathy. "You have spoken to the local authorities?" She shook her head quickly. "My brother Charles forbade it. He insists everything is imagination or overreaction. But I know better. I feel it, Monsieur Poirot, someone is watching me. Someone very close." Poirot leaned forward slightly. "And tonight? You wrote that you could not wait." Eleanor's eyes clouded. "I fear something terrible is coming. The atmosphere in this house is wrong. Please, you must help me before it is too late." Poirot's voice was soft, reassuring, but firm. "Mademoiselle, Hercule Poirot never turns away from a lady in distress. Rest assured, I will uncover the truth, with order, method, and the little grey cells." A faint smile flickered across her lips, grateful yet frail. But suddenly her expression shifted. She glanced over Poirot's shoulder, her eyes widening as though she had heard something, a soft footstep, a whisper, a presence. "You must excuse me," she stammered. "I will speak more tomorrow. For now, I must retire." Poirot rose. "Of course." But as Eleanor hurried from the room, Poirot's keen eyes caught something on the doorframe, a faint smear of gold paint. "Fresh." He approached it, examining the thin streak with meticulous interest. "Curious," he murmured. "A detail small enough that most would overlook. But Hercule Poirot, he overlooks nothing." Behind him, the fire crackled weakly, the shadows stretching like spectral fingers across the carpet. And somewhere deep within Winterset Hall, unseen, silent, something stirred. A mystery had already begun. Chapter 2, Whispers in the Hall. The dining room of Winterset Hall glowed with a subdued, almost guarded warmth, as though the chandeliers themselves were reluctant to cast their radiance fully. Tall windows overlooked the darkened grounds, their glass panes reflecting the flames of the candles that stood in stiff, unmoving lines along the polished table. The atmosphere felt elegant, yes, but also strangely hollow, as though something vital had fled the house long ago. Hercule Poirot, ever appreciative of order and tranquility, found the silence that hung between the members of the household oddly heavy. It was not the comfortable quiet of a family used to one another's company. No, this was the hush of people with secrets. Eleanor Whitcomb sat at the far end of the table, poised but tense, her fingers resting on her cutlery without truly holding it. Every few minutes, her gaze drifted toward the door, as though expecting someone, or dreading someone's arrival. To her right sat Charles Whitcomb, her younger brother, a man of stern posture and tighter temper. His dark hair was slicked back meticulously, but his brow furrowed every time a servant approached. He spoke little, but each word was delivered with clipped authority. To Eleanor's left was Oliver Brent, her fiancé. A handsome man with neatly combed auburn hair, he carried a magnetic charm that should have warmed the room. Yet Poirot sensed something off in the man's smile, something faintly rehearsed, like an actor playing a role too carefully. Further down the table sat Dr. Finch, a round-faced, nervous man whose spectacles reflected the candlelight with every anxious glance. he appeared constantly on the verge of speaking yet never quite found the courage. At the opposite side was Miss Lorna Vale, a distant cousin visiting from Bath. She had a dreamy appearance, golden hair braided loosely over her shoulder, pale blue eyes that wandered about the room as though following invisible threads of thought. Poirot watched her for a moment. There was something in the softness of her gaze that did not match the tension of the room. And finally, there was Mrs. Hargood, the housekeeper, thin, sharp, and watchful. Her greying hair was tied severely at the back of her head, and she moved like a woman who had lived her entire life carrying burdens heavier than trays. Poirot found himself fascinated by the interplay of glances, deliberate conversations, and suppressed irritation that circulated around the table like a hidden current. He had only been in Winterset Hall for an hour, yet already the cracks in its polished surface were beginning to show. The first course had barely been finished when Charles cleared his throat with unnecessary force. "Eleanor," he said sharply, "I trust our guest has been made aware of the situation." "Not fully," Eleanor replied quietly, her eyes fixed on her plate. "Well, then you must tell him," Charles insisted, voice rising just enough to make Mrs. Hargood flinch. "He should not be kept in the dark." Oliver frowned. "Charles, don't pressure her. She seems tired enough." "She's tired," Charles snapped, "because of all this nonsense." Poirot watched them without stirring. Family tension, he thought, often revealed more than simple answers ever could. Eleanor's jaw clenched gently. "Enough, Charles. I will speak to Monsieur Poirot in due time." Charles scoffed, muttering something under his breath about dramatics. Poirot gently dabbed his lips with a napkin. "Perhaps, messrs, we shall allow the mademoiselle to decide when she is ready. Fear is not soothed by force." Oliver chuckled, though without warmth. "Poirot is right." Dr. Finch nodded vigorously, as though eager to align himself with the safest opinion. "Yes, yes, quite right." Poirot observed them all. Fear. Frustration. Anxiety. This table was not merely set for dinner. It was set for conflict. The tension finally broke when a loud, sharp crash echoed from upstairs. Everyone jolted in their seats. "What was that?" Miss Vale gasped, clutching her napkin. Charles was already standing. Probably one of the servants being clumsy, he barked, but his tight expression betrayed him. Eleanor's face drained of colour. It came from the gallery. Poirot rose with remarkable calm. "Shall we investigate?" A procession formed, Charles in the lead, Oliver at Eleanor's side, Miss Vale clutching her shawl as though expecting a ghost, Dr. Finch breathing heavily, and Mrs. Hargood following with the resignation of a woman accustomed to distress. The gallery above the dining room stretched long and shadowed, its walls lined with ancestral portraits whose painted eyes watched silently from centuries past. The air felt faintly colder here. Near the center lay a shattered porcelain vase, the pieces scattered like jagged ivory on the floor. "That vase belonged to father," Eleanor whispered. "It has been in the family for generations." Poirot knelt beside the fragments, careful not to touch them. "Curious," he murmured. "One does not break such an object by accident." "It was placed on a stable pedestal," Eleanor added. "No draft, no imbalance." Charles's voice shook with anger. "Then someone did this on purpose." Poirot rose, following a faint scent in the air. Something subtle, sharp. Cologne. A very expensive one. He sniffed gently, once, twice. "Something wrong?" Oliver asked with an uneasy smile. Poirot turned slightly. "I detect a fragrance, monsieur. A costly cologne. One rarely worn in a country house. Yet here it lingers, faint, but unmistakable." Charles narrowed his eyes. "Are you suggesting?" Poirot held up a hand. "I suggest nothing. I merely observe. Miss Vale wrapped her arms around herself. This house feels haunted, she whispered. Everything is wrong. Mrs. Hargard glanced at her sharply. Winterset Hall is not haunted, miss. It is troubled, perhaps, but not haunted. Poirot stepped closer to Eleanor. Mademoiselle, may I ask, have there been other incidents of this kind? Eleanor swallowed, her lips trembling. Yes. A door left open when I locked it. Jewelry found missing then returned. Papers moved from one drawer to another. And once, her voice thinned. Once I woke to find someone standing outside my bedroom door. Miss Vale gasped. Did you see them? No, Eleanor whispered. I only heard the footsteps, slow, deliberate. Poirot's eyes sharpened. And did you tell your brother? Eleanor shook her head. He said I was imagining things. Charles bristled. Eleanor exaggerates. We must not assume every creak is danger. Poirot's gaze drifted toward the faint trail of porcelain dust that extended a little too far, almost as if the vase had been carried before being dropped. He saw also the slightest disturbance in the carpet fibers near a curtain. Someone had been standing there, watching. As the household drifted uneasily back downstairs, Poirot remained behind a moment longer. He walked slowly along the gallery, examining the portraits, the shadows, the floor. Something, or someone, had wanted to unsettle Eleanor Whitcomb. And tonight, they had succeeded. Poirot gently touched the smudge of cologne on the air again. Someone leaves clues that are too neat, he murmured. Too positioned. It is as though the stage has been set, but for what? And by whom? Winterset Hall held its breath around him, the silence deep and watchful. Poirot smiled faintly. The little grey cells, he whispered to himself, are most intrigued. Chapter 3, Shadows at Midnight. Night settled heavily over Winterset Hall, wrapping the vast estate in a blanket of quiet unease. The moon, pale and sharp as a polished coin, hung low above the lake, casting a faint silver shimmer across the still water. Inside the manor, the lamps had been dimmed, the fires left to die slowly in their grates, and the long corridors breathed with the cold hush of old houses after dark. Hercule Poirot, however, was not asleep. Though the room assigned to him was comfortable, tastefully furnished, immaculate sheets, precisely folded blankets, sleep did not tempt the mind of one already buzzing with suspicion. Too many details around Winterset Hall were out of place. Too many eyes watched too carefully. And the expression on Eleanor Whitcomb's face lingered in his thoughts like a shadow refusing to be brushed away. At precisely 11:30, Poirot rose, his movements neat and deliberate. He donned his dressing gown, tied the belt with symmetrical precision, and picked up a small torch from his bedside table. There is something, he murmured, that calls to me. A whisper in the air. A stirring of mischief. He opened his door quietly and stepped into the corridor. The upper landing of Winterset Hall stretched before him, long and dim, with only a thin strip of moonlight filtering in through an arching window. The old carpet muffled his footsteps, allowing him to move with ghost-like silence. Poirot had no intention of spying, he left that to others. But he believed in observing what others did when they believed themselves unwatched. Tonight, he felt certain someone would make a move. As he reached the end of the corridor near the gallery, he paused. The moonlight touched the shattered vase's remains, still lying in a neat pile awaiting collection. He crouched and examined the fragments again, this time with greater leisure. One piece caught his eye. A shard bearing a faint streak of dark blue, barely visible unless the light struck at the right angle. Paint, he whispered. From what, I wonder? He pocketed the shard and rose. Suddenly, a soft sound drifted through the stillness, footsteps. Quick, delicate, almost hesitant. moving from the direction of Eleanor's room. Poirot's eyes narrowed. He followed the sound until he reached the corner where the West Wing corridor branched off. He extinguished his torch and moved carefully to the wall, keeping his silhouette hidden. A figure appeared at the far end, a slender figure in a pale nightgown. Miss Lorna Vale. She was barefoot, clutching something close to her chest, her expression tense as she glanced nervously behind her. Poirot watched her slip into a small side room and quietly close the door. Curiosity, Poirot murmured. A dangerous quality in the wrong hands. Yet he did not follow her. Not yet. Moments later, another sound. More footsteps, heavier, urgent. Oliver Brent emerged from the opposite direction, his dressing gown untied, his movements quick and determined. He passed straight in front of Poirot, unaware of the detective's presence in the shadows, and headed toward the main staircase. To Oliver's left, another door opened slightly. Dr. Finch peeked out. Hair disheveled, spectacles crooked, breath shallow. He looked terrified. Poirot stepped gently into the sliver of moonlight. Doctor, he said softly. Finch nearly leapt into the air. Monsieur Poirot. I was not, well, I only heard. I imagine you heard more than footsteps, Poirot said calmly. You seem greatly alarmed. Finch wiped his forehead shakily. I heard voices. Or at least I thought I did. Whispering. Near Miss Eleanor's room. He swallowed. Someone is not sleeping well tonight. Poirot studied him. Finch's fear felt genuine, but fear could also be a tool, a mask, or a strategy. Return to your room, Doctor, Poirot said gently. The night holds many worries. Best not to collect more of them. Finch nodded weakly and disappeared behind his door. Poirot continued forward, but as he reached the top of the staircase, a sudden sound froze him in place. A door slammed somewhere downstairs. Then Eleanor's voice. Short, sharp. A gasp of fear. Poirot hurried down the steps, his movements quick despite his age. He reached the ground floor and scanned the dim hall. Eleanor, he called softly. No reply. But something else caught his attention, the drawing room door, slightly ajar. A faint golden glow spilled out. Poirot approached and pushed it open fully. Eleanor Whitcomb stood inside, her face pale, her hands trembling uncontrollably. A small table lay overturned near her feet. And on the carpet, barely visible, was a sheet of paper. Poirot moved to her side at once. Mademoiselle, are you hurt? No, she whispered, pressing a hand to her chest. But someone was here. Someone was in this room watching me. Poirot glanced around. Nothing disturbed except the fallen table and the single piece of paper. He picked it up delicately. On it, in sharp block letters. Leave now. Before you join them. Poirot's eyes tightened. Them? Eleanor swallowed. My parents died in this house when I was 16. Ah, Poirot murmured, and someone now suggests you may join them. Charming. She let out a trembling breath. Monsieur Poirot? I am beginning to think I should have left this place years ago. Poirot guided her gently toward a chair. Sit, mademoiselle. Breathe. And tell me, did you sense someone behind you? Did you hear footsteps? No. I only felt a presence. Her voice cracked. When I turned, the door moved, just slightly, as though someone slipped out. Poirot nodded. Then someone was here. But they left in haste. The warning was placed too neatly. Too deliberately. He lifted the note again. The paper was smooth, clean, no rough edges. No fingerprints. and the handwriting was disguised, printed with strained precision. "It is the work," Poirot murmured, "of someone who wishes to frighten, not harm." Eleanor looked up sharply. "You think this is a game?" Poirot shook his head. "A performance, perhaps. A staged drama. But I do not yet know the motive." He stepped toward the window and looked out into the moonlit lawn. Someone stood there. A shadowed figure near the hedges, half hidden, watching the house. Poirot's breath stilled. But in the instant he blinked, the figure stepped back and vanished into the darkness beyond. Poirot closed the curtains. "This house," he said softly, "is becoming very crowded with secrets." He turned toward Eleanor. "And I assure you, Mademoiselle, Hercule Poirot intends to uncover every one of them." Outside, the wind stirred the hedges in a faint hiss, as though whispering warnings of its own. Inside, Winterset Hall held its breath again. And somewhere in its depths, someone smiled in the shadows. The game had only just begun. Chapter 4: The Tension Beneath the Truce. Morning crept gently over the village of Windermere, brushing the cottages and hedgerows with pale gold. But inside Hawthorn Wick, the air remained cool and uneasy, as though the house itself held its breath. The servants moved quietly, speaking only in hushed voices. After the previous evening's distressing events, no one wished to disturb the lingering tension. Hercule Poirot descended the staircase precisely at 8 o'clock, immaculate as always. His grey suit was perfectly pressed, his moustaches sharply defined, and he carried the serene composure of a man untouched by the chaos of others. Inspector Flint awaited him in the breakfast room, seated stiffly at the table with a cup of tea he clearly did not enjoy. "Good morning, Inspector," Poirot greeted with pleasant dignity. "You slept, I trust, like the English proverb, soundly." Flint gave a humourless snort. "Hardly. Too much noise in the corridors. And too many secrets in this blasted house." Poirot lifted a brow. "Ah, but secrets, mon ami, are what give life its flavour. Without them, we detectives would be out of business." Flint ignored the remark and glanced at the folded paper beside him. "Before we begin anything else, we ought to speak to Mrs. Everleigh again. She's in a state this morning, apparently another message was slipped under her door." Poirot's eyes brightened with keen interest. "Another message? May I see it?" Flint produced the small, pale blue card. Upon it, in elegant handwriting, were the words, "You know far more than you admit. Guard your tongue, or pay the price." Poirot took the card delicately between two fingers. The same stationery as before. The same ink. But the tone, sharper. More desperate, perhaps. Flint drummed his fingers on the table. This could be the work of someone trying to frighten her into silence. Or, Poirot replied softly, to keep her from speaking the truth. He set the card down thoughtfully. "Come, mon ami. Let us speak with Mrs. Everleigh before the day grows too old. A nervous widow." They found her in the morning room, staring blankly into the garden. Her hands shook as she clutched her handkerchief. The moment she saw Poirot, her eyes filled with dread, as though she feared what he might reveal. "You received another warning," Poirot said gently. "Someone wishes to intimidate you." "I have already told you everything," she insisted. "I swear it." "I know nothing more than what I saw." Poirot lowered himself into the armchair opposite her, his gaze penetrating yet kind. "Madam, forgive my frankness, but you are an intelligent woman. And intelligent women often see more than they choose to admit. Something troubles you, something you have not yet told us." She stared at him helplessly, then closed her eyes as though mustering courage. "It's not that I'm hiding anything," she whispered. "It's simply, I'm afraid I may have misunderstood what I saw. And if I am wrong, I could be accusing an innocent person. Poirot leaned forward. It is not for you to decide guilt or innocence. Merely tell us what you observed. She bit her lip. Very well. On the night Mr. Wentford died, I went downstairs for a glass of water. As I passed the study, I heard raised voices. One of them was undoubtedly Mr. Wentford's. The other was softer. Controlled. A voice that did not match the anger in the argument. She paused, shaking. Poirot prompted softly, "And whose voice did you recognize, madam?" Her answer came barely above a whisper. "Lady Ashcombe's." Inspector Flint sat up straight. "Are you absolutely sure?" Mrs. Everleigh shook her head miserably. "No. That is the problem. It sounded like her, but it could have been someone mimicking her tone. The corridor was dim, and the door wasn't fully open." Poirot studied her pale face with grave consideration. "Merci, madam. Your honesty, even uncertain, is invaluable." As Poirot and Flint left the room, the inspector muttered, "Dangerous accusation. If it's wrong, it's slander. If it's right, then we're all sitting in a lion's den." Poirot nodded slowly. "OUI. And either way, someone fears what she might reveal. That is the greater clue. A house divided." The rest of the household had gathered in the dining room for breakfast, though the meal was marked by stiff silence. Lady Ashcombe sat at the head of the table, poised and elegant as ever, though her eyes bore a shadow that had not been there the day before. Edward sat to her right, nervously tapping the side of his teacup. Clara, pale and withdrawn, pushed food around her plate. Mr. Blake barely met anyone's eyes. Poirot and Inspector Flint entered, and the tension sharpened. "Good morning," Lady Ashcombe said with polite coolness. "I trust your night was restful." Poirot bowed slightly. "Most restful, madam. Though the new warning delivered to Mrs. Everleigh suggests that someone here was less at peace." The room stiffened collectively. Clara gasped. "Another warning? But why? What does Mrs. Everleigh know?" Poirot watched everyone carefully. Perhaps not what she knows, but what she might recall. Lady Ashcombe set down her fork with deliberate calm. "Monsieur Poirot, your implications grow tiresome. If you have something to say, say it plainly." Inspector Flint spoke bluntly. "Mrs. Everleigh heard you arguing with Mr. Wentford on the night he died." Silence fell like a dropped curtain. Lady Ashcombe's expression did not change, but something sharpened behind her eyes. "That," she said evenly, "is a lie." Poirot's gaze remained steady. "She did not state it as fact. Only that she believed she heard your voice." Edward frowned. "That's impossible. Mother was with me that evening. We were discussing estate matters in the library. She couldn't have been anywhere near the study." Poirot tilted his head. "A strong alibi from a dutiful son. But memory, monsieur, can be inflexible." Edward flushed. "I resent the suggestion." Poirot raised a calming hand. "Peace, monsieur. I merely observe." Lady Ashcombe rose gracefully from her seat. "This conversation is unproductive. Inspector, Monsieur Poirot, if you intend to continue hurling baseless insinuations, I suggest you be more precise." Poirot bowed again. "We intend only to find the truth." She left the room without another word. Poirot's observations. As the household dispersed, Poirot remained still, fingertips lightly touching. His eyes traced the doorway where Lady Ashcombe had disappeared. Inspector Flint grumbled, "You think she's capable of murder?" Poirot gave a small smile. "Everyone is capable of murder, mon ami. Under the right conditions." Flint sighed. "So what now?" Poirot stood. Now? We observe. We listen. And we wait for the guilty party to grow careless. When one hides a truth, one makes mistakes. He glanced toward the staircase where Lady Ashcombe had vanished moments earlier. And trust me, Inspector, the mistakes have already begun. Chapter 5, Whispers in the Walls. The afternoon sun filtered weakly through the tall windows of Hawthorn Wick, casting thin beams across the wooden floors. Despite the brightness outside, the house itself felt steeped in gloom. Heavy curtains, thick carpets, and a constant air of unease pressed inward like a silent weight. Poirot, ever sensitive to atmosphere, moved through the corridors as though listening to them. For houses, he believed, were sometimes more honest than the people who lived in them. He paused by a window overlooking the east lawn. A gardener trimmed the hedges with calm precision, the only soul on the estate who appeared entirely unbothered by the ongoing investigation. Poirot watched him for a moment, then resumed his walk. Inspector Flint trailed behind, notebook in hand. "Where exactly are we going?" he asked. Poirot placed a hand over his heart. "To follow the voice of my little grey cells, Inspector. They whisper to me, très doucement, to examine the study again." Flint gave a grunt of impatience. "We've already searched that room. Twice." "And yet," Poirot said softly, "the truth remains not in our hands. Therefore, something, however small, has escaped our notice." The study once more. The study seemed unchanged since their last visit, shelves neatly lined with books, the large mahogany desk standing like a fortress, and the high-backed leather chair turned slightly off-cent from the desk. Dust motes floated lazily in the air, catching the weak afternoon light. Poirot ran a careful finger across the desk's polished surface. "Observe, Inspector, the faint mark here. A circular impression, almost invisible." Flint leaned closer. "A glass?" "Not a glass," Poirot murmured, "but a small vase, perhaps. And yet there is no such ornament here now." Flint scribbled in his notebook. "So someone removed it after Wentford died." Poirot nodded. "Someone who wished us not to see it." He drifted to the window and examined the lock. "This window has been opened recently," he said quietly. Flint checked the latch. Indeed, a faint trace of soil marked the sill. "Could someone have entered from outside?" "Possible," Poirot replied. "But improbable. The ground below is undisturbed. No footprints. Then how?" "Patience, Inspector. Let us look further." Poirot knelt by the baseboard behind the desk, his eyes narrowing. He pressed lightly against a particular section of the wall. A faint click sounded. Inspector Flint straightened. "What was that?" Poirot smiled. An old manor often hides old secrets. He pushed again, and the panel loosened just enough to reveal a narrow cavity. Inside lay a small velvet pouch, its drawstring frayed with age. Poirot retrieved it carefully. Flint exhaled in astonishment. "Good Lord! How did you know to look there?" Poirot tapped his temple. "Because our murderer is tidy. And tidy people hide things in tidy places." He opened the pouch. Inside lay 3 items. A silver cufflink shaped like an animal's head. A tiny brass key, and a folded slip of paper bearing a single name. Edith Blake. Inspector Flint swore under his breath. "Blake?" "The solicitor." Poirot closed the pouch. "Let us not leap to conclusions. A name alone proves nothing. It may be a warning, a lie, or a misdirection. But why hide it? And in Wentford's study?" Poirot's eyes glimmered. "Ah, that is the question. One of 3. And each answer will lead us closer to the truth." A solicitor under pressure. Edward Blake was found in the library, pacing anxiously between shelves. When Poirot and Flint entered, he nearly dropped the book he was pretending to read. "Oh. Inspectors," he said, clearing his throat. "Can I help with something?" Poirot regarded him with polite interest. "Monsieur Blake, how long have you served the family of Mr. Wentford?" "Nearly 6 years," Blake replied. "I handled his estate matters, correspondence, and legal concerns." "And during those years," Poirot continued, "did he ever confide in you more than he should?" Blake stiffened. "I don't know what you mean." Inspector Flint stepped in. "We found something in Wentford's study. Something with your name on it." The young man paled visibly. "My name? In his study? What sort of thing?" Poirot held the velvet pouch in his gloved hands. "A cufflink, a small key, and a paper. That is all." Blake stared at the pouch as though it were a serpent. "I've never seen it." "I swear it." Poirot watched him closely. "Monsieur, your reaction suggests otherwise." Blake rubbed a hand across his forehead. "Look, Wentford and I had disagreements, heated ones, even. About financial matters. But I had nothing to do with his death." Poirot asked gently, "What matters, precisely?" Blake hesitated. His jaw clenched. "I shouldn't say," he muttered. "It involves confidential information." Flint barked, "A man's dead, Blake." "Confidentiality be damned." Blake closed his eyes, defeated. Wentford was making decisions that could ruin the estate. Risky investments. Deals bordering on illegal. I warned him repeatedly. He told me to mind my own business. Poirot nodded. "And did anyone else know of these tensions?" A short pause. "Yes," Blake admitted. "Clara knew. And Lady Ashcombe suspected." Poirot exchanged a brief glance with Flint. "Merci, monsieur," Poirot said. "You have been partially honest." They left Blake trembling behind them. The servant stories. Poirot next gathered the servants in the kitchen, the one place in the house where truth tended to slip through cracks like steam. He questioned the housemaid, the footman, and the cook. Each repeated the same themes. Strange footsteps at night. Whispers in the corridor. Lady Ashcombe's tense mood days before the death. Clara crying in her room after an argument with her uncle. Then Sophie, the youngest maid, spoke nervously. I heard something the night Mr. Wentford died," she whispered. "From behind the wall." "Which wall?" Poirot asked softly. "The one behind the study. There's a hollow space between the rooms. Sound travels through it." Poirot's interest sharpened. "And what did you hear?" Sophie wrung her hands. "Voices. 2 people arguing. One of them was Mr. Wentford. The other was," she hesitated. Poirot leaned forward. "Yes, mademoiselle." "A man's voice," she finished. "Quite low. Calm. Not shouting like Mr. Wentford was." Inspector Flint frowned. "That contradicts what Mrs. Everleigh told us." Poirot smiled faintly. "Not contradicts, Inspector, compliments. We are hearing a chorus, not a solo." Poirot's reflection. As he walked back to his room, Poirot mulled over each detail. A warning note. A hidden pouch. A missing vase. Multiple overheard voices. Financial tension. Family pressure. And a household built on secrets. He paused at the landing, letting his thoughts settle. "The truth," he murmured, "is beginning to take shape." But it is fragile still, like a butterfly's wing. One more clue, one more careless word, and it will reveal itself entirely. Poirot touched the banister lightly. And someone in this house, he added softly, is beginning to feel very afraid. Chapter 6: The Gathering Storm. Evening settled early over Hawthorn Wick, drawing long shadows across the hallways and cloaking the house in an atmosphere of anxious suspense. The wind brushed against the window panes with a low, restless sigh, as though echoing the tension simmering inside the manor. Poirot, ever immaculate, walked with deliberate steps, his polished shoes tapping faintly on the marble floors. Inspector Flint, however, was restless. He checked his watch repeatedly, paced the length of the corridor, and muttered under his breath. "This place feels like it's holding its breath," he said at last. "Everyone's hiding something. Every time we question one, two more lies pop up." Poirot gave a small smile. "My's OUI, Inspector. This is the nature of murder. It is not only the guilty who hide, the innocent conceal too, their shame, their fears, their secrets." Flint frowned. "And which of them is hiding murder?" Poirot lifted a hand gracefully. "In time, mon ami. In time." The dinner table of unease. Lady Ashcombe insisted dinner be served precisely at 7, as usual. "It is important," she told Poirot stiffly, "to maintain decorum. Chaos achieves nothing." But chaos was already in the air. The dining room gleamed with crystal glassware and silver cutlery polished to mirror brightness. Yet the atmosphere felt brittle, as though the slightest wrong word would shatter it. Lady Ashcombe sat at the head of the table, poised and elegant, but a faint tension pulled at her jaw. Clara, pale and withdrawn, toyed with her food without eating. Blake looked as though he hadn't slept in days. Edward avoided meeting anyone's eyes. Poirot and Inspector Flint sat quietly, observing. The conversation was forced at first, limited to polite remarks about the weather, the village, the servants' schedule. But the quiet eventually grew too heavy to ignore. It was Clara who broke first. "What will happen to all of us when the truth comes out?" she asked suddenly, her voice trembling. "Everything feels as if it's falling apart." Lady Ashcombe's spoon paused mid-air. "Clara, this is neither the time nor the place." "But it is the time," Clara whispered. "I can't keep pretending nothing happened." Inspector Flint leaned forward. "And what exactly did happen, Miss Clara?" She opened her mouth, closed it again, then looked helplessly at Poirot. I don't know. Not all of it. But I do know my uncle was terrified in the days before he died. He wouldn't tell me why, but I overheard bits. Something about a deal going wrong. A betrayal. And he mentioned. Lady Ashcombe cut in sharply. "Clara! That's enough." Clara recoiled as though struck. Poirot interjected softly, "Madam, allow the young lady to speak. She carries a burden. It is unfair to silence her." Lady Ashcombe's eyes flashed, not with anger, but with something like fear. Clara swallowed. "He mentioned someone in the house. Someone he trusted once, but could no longer trust. He said he feared what they might do." Blake shot up from his chair. "This is absurd." Wentford was hardly a saint. He probably imagined enemies everywhere. Poirot turned his sharp gaze on the solicitor. "And did you, Monsieur Blake, give him reason to distrust you?" Blake's face flushed crimson. "Absolutely not." But his hands trembled. Before Poirot could press further, the door swung open and Mrs. Everleigh entered, pale and breathless. "I'm sorry," she gasped. "But I found something. In my room." She held out a folded slip of paper. Poirot rose smoothly. "May I?" She nodded. Poirot opened it carefully. A single line was written in the same elegant handwriting as the previous threats. "Your memory is improving too quickly." Inspector Flint cursed under his breath. "This is escalating." Poirot slipped the paper into a small envelope. OUI. The murderer grows nervous. They seek to frighten Madame Everly into silence, or drive her into a mistake. Everyone at the table shifted uneasily. Lady Ashcombe stood abruptly. "This dinner is over." And without waiting for anyone else, she swept from the room. Behind closed doors. After dinner, Poirot excused himself and asked Flint to continue questioning Blake privately. Poirot wished to wander the manor alone, without the weight of official scrutiny. He moved through dim corridors, passing thick carpets and old portraits whose painted eyes seemed to follow him. The house creaked faintly, as if whispering its own secrets. Poirot walked slowly, letting his mind drift, letting the shadows settle into familiar shapes. He reached the far end of the west wing, unused bedrooms, a storage room, and the narrow staircase that led to the attic. Something had been troubling his thoughts since the afternoon, something small yet persistent. Sound travels through hollow walls. Two voices heard through the study. A hidden pouch stored neatly away. A missing vase, removed carefully. Someone in this house moved with deliberate precision. Someone meticulous. Someone who understood the layout of the manor intimately. Poirot laid a hand against the wall beside him and tapped lightly. Hollow. Just like the one behind the study. His eyes narrowed. An unexpected encounter. As he continued down the corridor, he saw a figure standing near the window, Clara. She started violently when she noticed him. "Oh, Monsieur Poirot, you frightened me." "Pardon, mademoiselle. But you seem troubled." Clara turned her face away, staring out into the dark garden. "Everything feels wrong. Everyone is watching everyone else. I can't sleep. I keep hearing noises in the walls." Poirot stepped beside her. "Noises, you say?" "Yes, whispers. Footsteps. I thought I was imagining them, but Sophie, the maid, heard them too." Poirot nodded slowly. "This house has many old passages. Secrets that were forgotten by most but not by all." Clara hesitated, then spoke in a trembling voice. "Do you think the murderer is still moving through them?" Poirot didn't answer directly. "I think, mademoiselle, that the murderer is desperate. And desperation makes people careless." Clara shivered. "I'm afraid it's someone I know. Someone who smiles at me in daylight." Poirot studied her carefully. "Tell me, did your uncle argue with someone close to you?" Clara hesitated. "Yes, but I was told it was nothing." "Who?" "Edward," she whispered. Poirot's brows lifted slightly. "Edward? The dutiful son." She nodded. "I didn't hear everything, but they were shouting about money. And about betrayal." Poirot's mind began pulling threads together. A fight. A secret deal. A hidden passage. A warning note. A pouch with Blake's name. Too many clues pointing in too many directions, which meant someone was carefully constructing illusions. And yet... Clara looked at Poirot with frightened eyes. "What should I do?" Poirot gently took her hand. "Trust, mademoiselle, not in the shadows, but in the little grey cells of Hercule Poirot. I promise you, before this night ends, I shall know the truth." A storm breaks. As Poirot walked Clara back to her room, thunder rumbled in the distance. Wind howled through the chimneys. The storm that had been gathering finally broke, rain lashing the windows in fierce sheets. The lights flickered. Poirot stopped abruptly, every sense alert. In the corridor below, a scream tore through the house. Clara gasped. Who was that? Poirot turned sharply, his expression grave and controlled. Mademoiselle, he said calmly, go to your room and lock the door. She obeyed without argument. Poirot hurried down the staircase, his footsteps echoing. The manor was awake now, doors opening, voices shouting, alarm spreading. Inspector Flint appeared from the parlor, pale and breathless. Poirot! It's Blake. They reached the study. Blake lay collapsed on the floor, gasping, his eyes wide with terror. On the desk lay another pale blue card. Poirot lifted it carefully. You were warned. Poirot looked at Blake, alive, but barely, and murmured. The storm has broken, Inspector. And the murderer is making their final moves. Chapter 7, Through the Hidden Passage. Rain hammered violently against the windows of Hawthorn Wick, turning the night into a blur of shadows and rattling glass. The storm seemed almost alive, its roaring winds filling every corner of the manor. Poirot stood perfectly still in the study, gazing down at Blake's trembling form. Fetch the doctor, Poirot ordered softly. Inspector Flint nodded and rushed out. Within moments, Clara, Lady Ashcombe, Mrs. Everleigh, and Edward had gathered in the corridor outside, pale and frightened. Poirot looked up. Ladies and gentlemen, return to your rooms. This is not the moment for panic. Lady Ashcombe bristled. How can you expect calm when another attempt has been made on someone's life? Poirot raised a hand. Because panic is what our murderer desires. They thrive on fear. On confusion. Do not help them. His tone held such firm authority that even Lady Ashcombe obeyed. When they departed, Poirot closed the study door quietly and knelt by Blake. Mon pauvre, he murmured. What did you see? What frightened you so? Blake gasped, clutching at Poirot's sleeve. I didn't see, just heard, something behind the wall. Poirot's eyes sharpened. Behind the wall, monsieur. Blake nodded frantically. Whispers, movement, and then someone rushed out, someone in the dark, tried to grab me. His voice broke into a weak sob. Poirot patted his shoulder gently. Rest, monsieur. You will survive. As Blake's breathing steadied, Poirot glanced toward the far corner of the study, the same section of wall where he had discovered the hidden pouch earlier. The storm outside growled. Poirot rose slowly. It is time, he whispered to himself, to meet the murderer where they hide. Inspector Flint returns. Flint pushed open the door moments later. The doctor is on his way, he said. Blake wasn't poisoned, was he? Poirot shook his head. None. Shock, fear, perhaps an attempt to strangle him, but not completed. Our murderer was interrupted. Flint frowned deeply. Interrupted by what? Poirot nodded toward the wall. By haste, Inspector. And by a hidden passage. Flint stared. You mean someone came through there? But how? Poirot interrupted gently. Help me move the desk. Together they slid the heavy mahogany desk aside. Poirot pressed along the panel edges with careful fingers, seeking the precise point. Click! A narrow door sprang open. Flint stood dumbstruck. I'll OUI, Poirot said quietly. The murderer has not only knowledge of this passage, they use it freely. A cold draft seeped out, carrying dust, earth, and something else, the faint scent of old perfume. Poirot stepped forward, raising a hand to silence Flint. Follow me, he whispered. But tread softly. The walls have ears. The passageway secrets. The hidden passage was narrow, dark, and lined with wooden slats thick with age. Poirot moved cautiously, lighting a small electric torch he carried for such moments. Flint followed, whispering, "How long has this existed?" "Since the earliest construction of the house," Poirot replied. "For servants, for secrets, for convenience, and many reasons. But most importantly, for concealment." Rain pounded overhead, muffled by the thick walls. Poirot stopped at a junction where the passage branched in two directions. "Where do these lead?" Flint whispered. Poirot pointed right. "To the unused bedrooms in the west wing." "And the left?" "To Lady Ashcombe's private sitting room." Flint sucked in a breath. "Are you saying?" Poirot raised a finger. "I am saying nothing yet. But we will learn soon." He turned left. The passage narrowed further, forcing them to walk single file. Poirot's torchlight revealed scuff marks along the floorboards, recent ones. "Footprints," Flint whispered. "Someone's been using this often." Poirot nodded. "The murderer, OUI. And perhaps another. Notice, the weight is not heavy. Someone slender, moving quickly." He reached a small wooden panel. Another latch mechanism. Poirot pressed it. Light spilled through the gap. Poirot extinguished his torch and peered through. They were standing behind a decorative tapestry hanging in Lady Ashcombe's sitting room. Inside, Lady Ashcombe herself sat rigidly in a chair, speaking in a hushed, urgent tone to Edward. Poirot motioned Flint closer. Edward's voice trembled. "Mother, if anyone finds out." Lady Ashcombe cut him off sharply. "We have survived worse scandals. You will do as I say. No one must know." Poirot listened, every muscle still. Edward continued, sounding desperate. "But Wentford threatened me. He said he would expose everything." Lady Ashcombe's voice grew icy. "Then he left us no choice." Flint's eyes widened, but Poirot touched his arm gently, warning him to stay silent. "Mother," Edward whispered, did you go to his study that night?" Lady Ashcombe hesitated. "Just for a heartbeat." "No," she said coldly. "And neither did you." Edward dropped his head into his hands. "We're trapped." Lady Ashcombe leaned forward, gripping his shoulders. "We are survivors. Keep your nerve, Edward. Crying achieves nothing." Poirot stepped back from the panel, closing it silently. Flint hissed, "Good grief. They practically admitted guilt." Poirot shook his head. "None, Inspector. They admitted fear. There is a difference." "The West Wing." Poirot turned and headed back to the junction. "Now we check the other path." Flint followed reluctantly. "I don't like this. Too many people using these passages." "Ah," Poirot murmured, "but there is one more secret these walls hold." They reached the West Wing panel. Poirot pushed it open. The room beyond was dusty, unused, dimly lit by the intermittent flashes of lightning outside. Poirot stepped inside. The air felt heavier here. Flint scanned the room. Nothing. Just old furniture. Poirot moved toward the wardrobe, the only piece not covered by a sheet. He opened it. Inside hung a single cloak, dark, hooded, and covered with faint droplets. Rainwater. Flint gasped. Whoever attacked Blake must have just returned. Poirot pointed to the floor. Footprints, small, delicate footprints, leading back into the passage. Flint muttered, "Those aren't a man's." "No," Poirot agreed. "They are a woman's." He bent to examine the prints more closely. And she was running. Flint swallowed. Lady Ashcombe. Poirot stood. "Perhaps. Or perhaps another woman entirely. He turned to Flint with a calm intensity. "Inspector, gather everyone in the drawing room. No one leaves. The final act begins tonight." "But you know who it is?" Flint demanded. Poirot gave a faint, enigmatic smile. "I know enough. A few more threads must be pulled, and then the tapestry will unravel." Back through the passage. As they re-entered the hidden corridor, Poirot whispered, "The murderer is frightened. They are making mistakes. And there is one thing they do not realize." "What's that?" Flint asked. Poirot's eyes glinted in the dim light. "That Hercule Poirot has seen what they hoped no one would see, and soon, their identity will stand revealed." Toward the final revelation. Lightning cracked loudly overhead as they emerged once more into the study. Blake was gone, taken to the guest room by the doctor. The storm raged, the manor shook, and the air felt tight with dread. Poirot straightened his tie. "Come, Inspector. We summon them all. Tonight, the truth shall be forced into the light." He paused, listening to the thunder roll across the sky. "And the murderer," he added softly, "will have nowhere left to hide." Chapter 8: A Pattern Revealed. The drawing room of Willowcombe Court felt unexpectedly hushed as Hercule Poirot arranged a circle of chairs with almost ceremonial precision. The morning sunlight filtered through the tall windows, casting warm pools of gold upon the carpet. Outside, the estate grounds looked serene, as though the storm of confusion that had seized the household these last days had never happened. But inside, tension clung to the air like an invisible mist. Sir Howard Bartlett sat stiffly near the window, his eyes hollow with worry. Beside him, Edith's sister, Mrs. Emily Rowe, wrung a lace handkerchief between her fingers. Lucinda Gray, the loyal but secretive housekeeper, watched everyone with a tight, unreadable smile. Mr. Silas Trent paced near the mantelpiece, unable to still his restless energy. An archer, faithful, trusted archer, stood behind a chair, his face composed but rigid. Inspector Flint, arms folded, leaned against the door, allowing Poirot full command of the room. At last, Poirot stepped forward, clasping his hands before him. "My friends," he began, "you have been patient as I, Hercule Poirot, have exorcised the little grey cells. Now, the matter is ready for its conclusion." A ripple passed through the group. Sir Howard cleared his throat. "You mean you know who killed Edith?" Poirot inclined his head. "But of course, Sir Howard. The question was never who, you understand. The question was how and why." Silas Trent halted mid-pace. "What do you mean by that?" Poirot smiled gently. "We shall come to it, monsieur. Sit, if you please." Reluctantly, Silas obeyed. Poirot began to walk slowly around the circle. "Let us consider dear Edith, a young woman of intelligence, sensitivity, and, most importantly, fear. She feared something very grave before her death, as she confided in her letter. Now, Edith kept no enemies in the ordinary sense. She was quiet, thoughtful, and loyal, particularly to this household. So we must look deeper, at relationships, patterns, habits." Poirot stopped beside the tea table where Lucinda had arranged cups that morning. He lifted a silver teaspoon between his fingers. "A teaspoon," he said thoughtfully, "may reveal more than a pistol when one wishes to kill quietly." Lucinda flinched almost imperceptibly. Inspector Flint frowned. "Poirot, you don't mean poison." "I mean precisely that, mon ami. Edith was not stabbed, nor strangled, nor shot. She was poisoned by a substance that creates confusion, dizziness, and ultimately cardiac failure, easy to mistake for natural causes in a young woman of delicate health." Sir Howard's voice trembled. "How could such a thing be done without any of us knowing?" Poirot turned toward him. Through routine, Sir Howard. Through ritual. Through the one habit Edith never questioned, her nightly chamomile tea. Lucinda's face paled. Poirot, she burst out. Are you suggesting I had anything to do with? Poirot raised a hand elegantly. Madam, I accuse no one yet. I merely state the facts. The housekeeper prepares the nightly tray, the maid delivers it. But who handles the key to the locked herb cabinet? Who alone knows where the stronger remedies are stored? That, Madam Grey, is you. Lucinda's composure cracked. She opened her mouth, but no words emerged. Poirot continued gently, but you did not kill her. Relief washed visibly across her face, and across several others. Poirot resumed his steady pacing. Let us return to the evening of the gathering. A night of celebration, we assumed. But for Edith, it was a night of decision. She told her sister she planned to leave the court. She told Archer she wished to speak with him privately. She wrote a letter to her fiancé, Mr. Trent. Silas stiffened. What letter? The letter you pretended not to know about, Poirot said softly. The one she placed in your hand when you walked her to the garden. She entrusted you with her fears, Monsieur Trent. She told you she had discovered something she should never have known. Silas stood abruptly. That's a lie. I barely spoke to her that evening. Inspector Flint moved forward, but Poirot merely shook his head. Sit, monsieur. Lying will not help you now. Silas slowly sank back into his chair, his face sweating despite the cool room. Poirot looked around at the others. You wonder still why poor Edith had to die. Allow me to illuminate the whole picture, beginning with the thefts that plagued Willowcombe Court last autumn. Sir Howard blinked. What do those have to do with? Everything. Poirot declared. One jewel here, a silver trinket there, small things, almost insignificant. We assumed an outsider. But the truth, Miss Amos, lay much closer. His gaze settled upon Archer. The butler's expression tightened, but he did not speak. Poirot continued, Archer, you have served this family for 2 decades. Loyal, dignified, respected. But the pressure of debts, private debts, changed your course. At first, you intended only to borrow small items and replace them discreetly. But your creditor, Monsieur Trent, had more ambitious ideas. Silas lunged to his feet. I did nothing. He's framing me. Poirot's voice remained calm. You had motive, Monsieur Trent. You gambled heavily and owed dangerous sums. Archer confided in you foolishly, trusting the man engaged to Edith. Together, you arranged to steal from Sir Howard and sell the valuables outside the county. A perfect scheme until Edith uncovered it. He turned to Archer. She overheard you both in the conservatory the night of the last theft. Archer's stoic facade collapsed. He swallowed hard. Yes, she heard us. But I swear, Mr. Poirot, I never wanted her harmed. I tried to tell her we could explain everything. It was Silas, he panicked. Poirot nodded. Just so. Monsieur Trent feared Edith would expose him. He knew losing his engagement meant losing his financial lifeline. And so, a plan formed. A cruel, calculated plan to slip a slow-acting poison into the herb jar, knowing Lucinda would unknowingly brew the fatal cup. Lucinda gasped in horror. Silas shook violently. You can't prove any of that. Poirot smiled with gentle triumph. Au contraire. The tea jar in Edith's room contains traces of aconite. The fingerprints upon the inner lid are yours alone. Inspector Flint stepped forward sharply. That's enough. Silas Trent, you are under arrest for the murder of Edith Rowe. As the inspector led Silas away, the young man's protests faded into the corridor. Poirot exhaled softly. A tragedy, yes. But the pattern is complete. Sir Howard approached him with gratitude etched across his weary face. Monsieur Poirot, we can never thank you enough. Poirot bowed lightly. I am content, Sir Howard, when justice is served and order restored. Emily Rowe, tearful but relieved, clasped Poirot's hand. You've given my sister peace. Poirot offered her a gentle smile. The truth always rises, madam. One must only observe carefully and listen to the whispers between the silences. As the household slowly dispersed, Poirot stood alone for a moment, gazing out at the estate grounds where the sunlight shone brightly upon the lawns. A beautiful place, he murmured. And now, at last, a place free of shadows.